Hey guys, I'm Kyle with Rhino. In this video, we're going to go through the different settings on the hardware and in the app, show you what they are and what you can use them for. All right, let's go into the main menu, navigate right over to settings, click in, and at first you see joystick sensitivity. Let's click into that and see our options. We have low, medium, and high. What this does is it controls the sensitivity of the joystick in keyframe mode. So if you want it to go faster or slower, you can set that here. All right, let's navigate over. Next one is motor location. By default, we always put our motor on the right-hand side of the slider, and that is for cable routing purposes. But if you have a shot where you need to put your slider on the opposite side, if you want your controls to go the right way, you need to set it up so that motor location is on left. All right, let's go over to motor type. This is also very important. We have up to 3 different types of motors available. Currently on the new Rhino slider system, there is the high speed and also the high torque, but we also support legacy motors, which is for the Evo system. It has the same gear ratio as the high speed motor, but what it does is it sets a buffer because the motor sticks up higher. If you have your hand on R2, you might squish it. So we limit your slider travel so that you don't do that. Next up is also very important. It's your slider length. If your slider is running in to the end plate, you probably have it set for a 42-inch slider. Or if it's only going halfway down the slide, you probably have it set up for a 24-inch slider if you're on a 42-inch slider. So right now I have it at 24-inch, I'm gonna leave it there. Next up is camera size. We have the options of large and small. Now, small means any camera under 5 pounds, large means any camera over 5 pounds. We broke it up there because typically you have your DSLRs, which are all going to be under 5. I mean, unless you have a huge battery grip and a huge cinema lens, most people don't do that. For over 5 pounds, you typically have a cinema rig that's going to be larger. We use extremely high torque motors for the tilt motor specifically on this system, but due to our design, you are cantilevering it over. So the more that you raise your center of gravity with a larger camera with more weight, the less weight you're going to be able to use. So if you select a large camera, it's going to ask you to calibrate tilt before you set up your moves. And that just makes sure that you're centered from the start of your move, and then you can only move forward 20 degrees and backward 20 degrees to make sure that the motor can hold your heavy setup. All right, next up is Invert Joystick. Now this is specifically for tilt on the joystick, and this has been the cause of a lot of contention here at Rhino. So the question is, when you move the joystick forward, does the camera tilt up or does it tilt down? I used to play a lot of Halo back in the day. I love first-person shooters. And when you have an Xbox controller and you move your right joystick up, you are going to look upward. And so that's what the system does by default. If I want to invert it, if it feels weird to you, that's totally fine. Click invert and it will go the opposite direction. Next up is the time-lapse type. So we have 2 options here. We have simple and we have advanced. By default, we use advanced. What that does is it actually turns R2 into an intervalometer, which shutters your camera in between movements to capture a time lapse. We've been doing this for years. It's a very common method. Sometimes though, you don't want the shoot, move, shoot type of time lapse. You just want a smooth, continuous time lapse where you're not triggering the shutter. And you might do that if you're using an iPhone to capture a time lapse, if you're using a GoPro where you can't sync up intervals. Most of the time we're using advanced, but simple is there. Just know it's basically a very, very long video move that does not trigger your shutter or stop. And finally, we have Timelapse Menu type. We have classic and we have Rhino. So when we came out with the Rhino motion controller, we wanted to simplify how you set up a time lapse. So instead of choosing the number of shots and then choosing your interval after you select your shutter speed, what we do is you select your shutter speed, you select your video length, so how long do I want time lapse to be when I put it into Premiere, and then my duration, how much time do I have to capture this time lapse. It's, to me, a more intuitive way, but there are some cases and a lot of people that like to do it the other way with number of shots and interval options. So when you change this in settings, it will update the menu when you are setting up a time lapse in the other modes. Let's take a look at the settings in the app. So I'm going to pair to my R2 unit called tripod. I'm going to go to settings. Here I have my name, which I can change. I think tripod's kind of lame. Let's call this guy call it Rhino. Okay, I'll save that. Next up, we have your firmware version. There's going to be multiple versions of firmware listed in here. And if there's an update, you will be notified in the app. It takes about 30 seconds to install the latest version of firmware. It's very quick and very efficient. We'll go back. Now we have trackpad sensitivity. This is where you set the sensitivity of the trackpads when you set up a video move. It's very similar to setting up the joystick sensitivity on the hardware itself. I'm not going to go into the rest of these. You have motor location, which we've covered, motor type, slider length, camera size, and tilt invert. All of those are very similar as the hardware. So if you have any questions about the menu options or anything about Arc 2 at all, don't hesitate to reach out to support@rhinocg.com.